Welcome to the Chaos and Light podcast. I am your host, Angela Levesque, and this podcast explores mind, mystery, and human potential. On today's episode, we have Virginia Oman, and we discuss the mind-body connection, positive psychology, how to change our thoughts and change our body. It's a fantastic conversation. If you haven't checked out chaosandlight.com yet or haven't been there in a while, there's all sorts of podcasts, even beyond the Chaos and Light podcast, articles on intention, synchronicity, consciousness, all sorts of resources for your conscious evolution, as well as if you are in need of guidance, if you find yourself in a life transition, do check out the offerings page there, as well as the sacred geometry page if you haven't been there yet. So check out chaosandlight.com. I will be back after this ridiculously short break with Virginia Oman. Are you enjoying this podcast and want to help this lady out? Well, share it with friends, or even better, leave a review on iTunes. We'd love to hear from you. Now back to the show. I'm here today with Virginia Oman, who has been described as the physical form of the mythological symbol of the phoenix, rising out of the ashes of death and into a life of freedom, joy, and exhilaration. After MS took her physical functioning away and robbed her of hope from having a meaningful future, she seriously considered opting out of life. It was at that moment she took matters into her own hands. To bring back her body, listening to her own intuition, she developed a specific path to transform her body, mind, and soul, and is now happier with more energy and love for life than ever before. She's decided to dedicate her life to helping others who, for whatever reason, have lost hope and feel trapped in despair. Through implementing the tools she has developed, anyone can get out of the place of darkness and into the light of a life of great happiness and health. Well, with that, I want to welcome Virginia to the program. Hello, how are you doing today?
Hi, Angela. Yeah, good to see you. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for coming on. I am very interested in your story. So I have been doing some version of internet radio or podcast since about 2012, and I've had the blessing of interviewing many people who have a similar story where they were diagnosed with some sort of, very serious illness. Western medicine basically said, this is the best we can do, just kind of go home.
Yep.
And in every case, they decided, just like you, to take matters into their own hands and then have been living wonderful, fulfilling, healthy lives. So I would love for you to start telling us a little bit about your background and about your healing journey that brought you here today.
Sure, be happy to. First, I want to start by just kind of a plug for you, because when I was looking for places that I might want to get my message out, your particular site caught my eye because of some of the bullet points that you have listed there. And some of them are, you had a question there, do you want to operate from a higher perspective? I really resonate with that, because we all want to find what I feel is a higher state of being, a better state of being. So that resonated with me. And also, are you interested in having a deeper sense of meaning and purpose? Certainly my work as a psychotherapist and life coach, that is so important for all of us, no matter what, to have a daily sense of meaning and purpose. And some of my work with my folks, when I work with them, is to actually help them find what is their sense of purpose, what is their meaning, because we're all meant to share that, to find those gifts and purposes and to give that back to the world. I think that's why, as divine spirits, we're all here on this earth. So, and releasing energetic blocks or old stories that keep us stuck, big time. So you're speaking my language there. Wanting to feel more in sync with the flow of life, just letting yourself be and be present. And then the last one was how does your worldview limit your potential? And I would go one further and say, how does your inner belief about yourself limit your potential? And one of the things I help clients with is, how does your inner belief about yourself limit and determine your perspective of the world and your life? So I just want to say those are great questions that you have on there. And I hope people check out your site.
Oh, thank you so much for that. I really
Yeah.
appreciate that.
My journey. So 1988, I was diagnosed with MS, and the doctor at the time came in and said, gave me the diagnosis, and I didn't know anything about MS at the time, but I knew that wasn't a good term, wasn't good news. And so I said to her, well, what do you suggest? Where do I go from now? What do I do? And she said, well, if I were you, I'd look into getting a wheelchair. That was 1988. And I remember when she said that there was this internal, it's my intuition, just screamed in my head, there's no way in hell I'm going to be in a wheelchair. So I just discarded that. But it gives you an example of what happens in the medical community a lot of times. If I hadn't been a person at that time that had a good sense of self and a belief in my determination and following my intuition, I would have bought hook, line, and sinker what she had said. I would have gone out and got a wheelchair. I would have brought it home and just seen it every day and thought of, well, pretty soon, I guess I'm going to need that. And I just would have just prescribed myself right into the wheelchair. And I didn't do it, obviously, but so many people do. So many people take that word of the medical establishment as gospel and go with it. And they just dig themselves into this hole of being stuck and watch their body go down and down for whatever reason. So, so anyway, I was very fortunate because I didn't believe that. I didn't take that prescription. But so for a while, I was able to really push back the effects of MS for quite a long time. And then when they did finally start catching up with me, again, I just got to a place where I was watching my body go down and down. And I went back to the medical establishment. They didn't have anything else to offer except medications that had more side effects than anything else. So, I just found myself in a real place of despair. I didn't have a good sense of purpose then. I didn't have a good sense of meaning in my life. And so I just watched as my body declined. And I did get to the point of seriously considering opting out. And, that was a very bleak state of despair that I never want anybody to have to get to for whatever reason. It doesn't have to be a medical issue that brings them there. It could be any kind of loss or feeling of being stuck with something that you can't get past. So I just decided at that point, it was either I was going to do this thing and say goodbye to life or not. There was a point of me that spoke really clearly and said, it's not that I want to die. I don't want to die, but I just want to live with independence and have my life back. I want to feel good. I want to feel meaning and happiness. And so I just vowed to myself, all right, I'm going to see what I can do on my own. So I just left there recommendations. Um, they were saying at the time, if you have MS, you don't want to exert yourself. You don't want to do heavy exercising. And for me, that didn't work. I'm not, never have been a yoga type of person, though yoga is great, but I've always been a runner, a climber, a swimmer, a backpacker. And so when those things were taken away from me, when I was no longer able to run, I just kind of took it as, well, I guess life is over. And so when I started to take my life back, I rethought that. And I said, let's work on finding what I can do and start slowly, no matter how slow that is. So I went to the water because I could no longer run. I went to the water and found a pool nearby. And at that time, I could only do, I think, 4 lengths of the pool because I had lost my ability to kick. My legs were so weak. And obviously, if you can't kick in the water, you don't get very far. So, but I refused to give up. I refused to take no. And so I just started there. What I did was I developed my own stroke, underwater stroke. It's maneuvering my torso in the water like a dolphin to get me from one end of the pool to the other. When I first started, it was very exhausting to do that. Obviously, I wasn't kicking, but I did it from the wall to halfway to the pool and then all the way back to the wall. And that's where I started. And I just kept with it and increased the amount of days that I was going and slowly increased the amount of laps I was doing. And I started there. And because I didn't give up, I started noticing that eventually I started getting more energy. And that was huge for me. Huge. I started getting more clarity of mind. My memory got better. And I just started to feel better and more hope. And I think that's the worst thing that anybody can lose for whatever reason in life is when a person loses hope of having a meaningful future. That's the worst. And so when these kind of things that I started to work on and develop started to take hold, I really vowed to myself at that point that I just wanted to share what I was doing with other people, so that no one would have to get to that place of bleakness and despair again, because that's just the worst place to be. So I developed not only physical things that I was doing, but fitness, nutrition, and a sleep protocol, water protocol, and mind body. I'm a firm believer in the mind body and body mind connection, and also positive psychology. In my work with my clients, I implement positive psychology, which goes one step further than regular psychology or mental health therapy. You help people get out of a place of depression. And in my work, since I started subscribing to positive psychology, it takes a step further, and that is not only getting out of depression, but getting into a place where you flourish. Positive psychology, developed by Martin Seligman, actually looks at the study of what makes people happy, what makes people flourish. And that's where I work with my clients at.
And I absolutely love that because when I started doing my own research in mind body skills and come across positive psychology, that made so much sense to me. We spend so much time in, especially I'll use your term, the medical establishment, focusing on managing symptoms, focusing on the deficits and the dysfunction,
Yes.
especially in psychology. It makes so much sense to study what makes people thrive.
Yeah.
And then help people implement those tools. And it's amazing to me because even if you look at the research, like as far as exercise and depression and anxiety and those types of things. Like that is, I mean, it's pretty fascinating that we have all of these skills and tools at our fingertips that actually help people flourish.
Yep.
And yeah. And instead of just saying, oh, you have this symptom, let's see if I can help you manage that.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great point. So I was thrilled when I found that. And I don't think Martin Seligman gets near the credit that he deserves. But he was finding that out and doing that research back in the early 90s. So it's amazing to work with clients and see the transformation that when I'm working with folks, how they just not only get into a place of light and feeling hope again, but they have meaning and purpose in their life, and they have joy and exhilaration and discover a whole new life. I mean, it's interesting for me that even in spite of having MS, because of this journey that I've gone through with it and finding these tools at work, I am now more fulfilled, happy, and joyful than I ever have been in my life, even before MS came in the picture. And that to me is really proof of the pudding. And that's what I'm wanting to help share and give to other people who just feel like something's got them really stuck.
What are some of the tools in the positive psychology tool bag?
Well, the first thing that I have my folks do, and if they go on my website, I do give a free document that I wrote about it. And that is really understanding what the mind-body and body-mind connection is. A lot of people feel like, oh, yeah, I've heard of that. I know that. No, they don't. And so I really break it down into specifics. And then I help them to understand the steps to utilizing it. Because it, as with anything, if you understand something on a cognitive level only, that does nothing because you're not implementing it. You're not putting it into practice. And when you start to really understand it from the inside out, then you believe in it. Then you know that this is something that is really true. And you subscribe to it and put it into practice every day. And no, it's not an easy overnight thing that happens, but it's amazing how powerful it is, just making little shifts at a time. So they would start there and understanding that. And I also on that document, I give some reading information and books, specifically one by Candace Pert. I don't know if you've read
Molecules of
Emotion.
Emotion. That's right. Yes.
Yeah.
Read that a long time ago.
Yeah. Incredible.
So one of the things that I've noticed you said is mind, body, and body, mind. Why do you usually when you hear people talk about it, they just say the mind body connection. Why do you say it both ways?
Yeah, great question. Because it does work both ways. Unless we are dealing with something like the flu or COVID, something like that, chances are, if you ask yourself at any given time during the day how you're feeling physically, if the answer comes back blah, tired, unmotivated, what I encourage people to do, and when we work together, I have them actually develop a way to track this, is to figure out what were the thoughts that came right that you'd been thinking for the last 3 to 5 minutes. And every single time the thought comes before because the thought determines the body's chemicals get released. And the body's chemicals, depending on the thought, will either be feel good chemicals or not feel so good chemicals. And it works both ways. So the body influences what the thoughts are going to be and right back at it. So There's a one-to-one communication link, and understanding how that works and how to work with it is the key to turning things around.
Is that along, Caroline Myss would say your biography creates your biology. So saying that the story, basically the story that we tell ourselves about ourselves, has a very direct impact on the biology. So the cascade of hormones, we have our thoughts, and then there's, a whole bunch of biochemistry connected to those thoughts. And, then our biochemistry gets used to having those same inputs over and over again. And then we have the same thoughts, and then we create those really strong neural networks. And
exactly.
Yes. So what is something to change the initial thought? What was something that you suggest?
Well, there's a bunch of different things, but one thing I can share right off the top is to find out, and through a series of questions that I share with my clients, we work on identifying the 5 most common subconscious thoughts that they have about themselves and the world that are so ingrained, have been with them for so many decades, they don't even know that they're feeling it and thinking these thoughts. It's just it's like you said, it's part of their neural network. It's ingrained, it's part of their fabric, and they've kind of bought it as a sense of, this is me, this is my identity. And it's not, right? But it seems like that when we're caught up into that. So when we've identified, anywhere from 3 to 5 internal thoughts, and they usually begin with something like I am, or life is, fill in the blank, or people are, fill in the blank. So we work with that, and then we understand, I give them a particular tool of a schema that helps them to understand, how does that really work on a moment by moment basis in terms of determining how they feel about themselves, and therefore how they see the world and how they see their reality on a moment by moment basis. And then from that point, we work into recognizing, being what I call a thought detective, and being able to recognize during the day, I think one of those thoughts came up. And if I don't know that a thought came up, ask yourself, checking in periodically through the day, asking yourself, how am I feeling right now? And then if it's anything less than good or positive, to see if you can identify one of those thoughts that we've come up with. It's amazing how it always goes back there. And then the last piece is, well, not the last, but moving on from there.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah. Moving on from there is great. You identified the thought. Fantastic. Second thing to do immediately, have a second thought. Have a second thought. So when you catch yourself having that negative thought, or going back to that default thought about yourself, catch yourself. Don't beat yourself up about it, because we all have these first thoughts. They're kind of like knee-jerk reactions. Don't beat yourself up, but just say, I'm thinking that way. Do I want that thought? Is that for my better interest? Is that for my best well-being? And if not, what thought do I want to have? What thought do I want to replace that with? And it's amazing when we find that we can do this, that gives us the power, because it is within our power. So much of our reality in our life is in our power to create. And once we tap into that potential, we are limitless.
I love that. I absolutely agree with all of that. So because I know that you have training as a therapist as well as a life coach. So Is that something that you're always blending together when you work with people?
I really am. I got to say, I'm also a nationally certified personal fitness trainer and wellness coach. And because of the body mind connection that I have always believed in, and the mind body connection, I wanted purposely to combine those fields. And I started doing it back in the late 1990s. And I've just found there's so much correlation that I do, even with my personal fitness and wellness clients. I do a lot of positive psychology with them and mind body. Absolutely. It is all interlinked. You know from your research that way in the past, we used to think of there's psychology and there's the body, and there was this disconnect. The two were not related. Absolutely not true. Everything now proves that they talk to each other second by second by second, all the time.
Yes, it's interesting. When I did some of my mind body training at the Benson Henry School of Mind Body Medicine, and I was surrounded by many doctors there who were taking the same training as me as part of their continuing education, and so many of them thought it was bullshit.
I know.
Like, what are you talking about? How is it in this day and age you think that this is like nonsense? They were sitting beside me making fun of it, and I'm like, well, actually, this is the stuff I teach all the time with people on the cancer survivorship spectrum. So I personally don't think it is, but it's amazing to me that we wouldn't understand that at this point.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And now they're eating their words, because they know so much of research is showing that this is absolute truth. So.
Well, my background is actually in exercise physiology as well. And you talk about the magic of movement. And where does the magic come in that?
The magic is knowing and really understanding that our bodies were meant to move. We are Homo sapiens. We are animals. We are primates. We are biologic. Our bodies were made to move. Everything that happens in our body in terms of health, physiologically as well as emotionally, psychologically, is all dependent on movement and freedom and being outside and seeing the sky and seeing the different colors of the seasons and feeling the wind and feeling the sun. So much of that is body, mind, spirit. But when we're moving, we're circulating our lymph throughout our system, we're cleansing, we're strengthening our mitochondria, which is our individual power packs or batteries in each of our cells. When you're doing that and you're conditioning and increasing your cardiovascular, you are sending in feel-good emotions, endorphins, serotonin, the natural stuff, dopamine, the natural, wonderful feel-good emotions of peace and tranquility, and just the emotion, I like to describe it as all is well with the world. When I'm now a distance swimmer after all this continuing effort. And when I get out of swimming laps, my entire day is set before me. I could be in bumper to bumper traffic for an hour. It doesn't matter. All is well with the world. I'm at peace. Everyone is wonderful and peaceful and loving. And that's the way the world is. It's just that when we get separated from our body and things are not going well, we get stuck in a place of psychological stuckness, and things in our body start to deteriorate in terms of their ability to function and be healthy systems. And so everything goes down the tubes, everything. And a lot of people don't realize the extent of that. And then when we start just making some small changes and they see the major differences in not only how their body and their health is responding, but their emotional and psychological health. Oh my gosh, they are just thrilled.
Yeah, it's you can see my background. I have one thing on my wall, and that was actually my very first article. My husband had it, he had it framed for me, the very first article I had published, and it's on holistic fitness and how exactly what you were talking about, how there's so much more available. Even this idea of steady state, where your oxygen supply and your oxygen demands, there's this perfect balance. And yeah, being outside, and I look around and there's just so much uncertainty, and part of me is quite upset with the messaging, especially as we're in this global pandemic, that we didn't tell more people to like get outside and get some exercise and move their body and move some of that anxiety out, move some of that uncertainty out of the body, get some vitamin D, synthesize some vitamin D from being in the sunshine. And I think we spent like something like 10, I think it was almost, or no, maybe it was $3 trillion on the messaging for vaccines, which are whatever, that is fine. But what if we also talk to people about healthy lifestyles and movement? Oh, yeah. And
exactly.
How many, because we know comorbidities and obesity and all of that is very very interrelated to this pandemic. And we just missed such an important opportunity to speak with people about this. Do you agree?
Yeah, I agree. And you asked me about the magic of movement. I give workshops on each of these topics. And when I termed it the magic of movement, because in the beginning of my first lecture on that, I go in and I say, imagine that you don't know anything about me, but that I'm supposedly a research scientist that just got back from the Himalayan mountains. And I had studied with supposedly the wisest person on earth. And I was able to get in with her and actually speak with her. And I asked her, about things like the meaning of life. And I asked her about happiness and fulfillment. And what I learned when I came back from there and realizing was, I said that if I could tell you that I discovered what this magic is, what this tool is, imagine that it was free. It was accessible for everybody. And it was totally holistic, had no side effects, and had everything wonderful about it, totally safe. And it was available for you right here, right now. Would you want to know what it was? Everyone in that class, of course, raises their hand and says, yes. And so when I say it is simply movement, and I say movement because people don't like the word exercise, but that's exactly what exercise is. It's moving. And it can be dancing. It can be whatever the movement is, but it is magic. It is that magic. It is the key to health, wholeness, and happiness on a spiritual, psychological, emotional, and physical basis. And when you combine it with understanding things like the body-mind connection and certain other tools, you can do anything. You can, I never thought in a million years I'd be able to ride a two-wheel bicycle again. All my neurologists said, you're absolutely crazy. Don't even try that, because your sense of balance has been taken away. But it's something I wanted to do. And it was a mission of mine. And I had gotten to the point of being able to not only walk with lightweight hiking poles. And I thought, what else do I want to do? And the answer came back. It was spring, and I wanted to ride a two-wheel bicycle again. And so I just set my mind to it and utilizing the tools. 11 and a half months later, I rode a two-wheel bicycle again. And that there's videos of me doing that on my website. So you can do, you are limitless. And it's such a lovely gift to share that with people and have them and just watch the lightness and the joy come on their face. I'm sure you can agree with that, have experienced that.
That is such an inspiring story because yes, you brought the word hope up a few times. And I know from my over almost a decade and a half of working in the cancer survivorship space that very often that you would hear the term false hope, that their doctors didn't want to give them false hope. And that, there was a lot of times I had to bite my tongue and I had to stay in my lane, and that's all. But to me, that is such an important piece that we talk about, because it's crazy to me, because even if we look at even just the way research is done or whatever, that tells the story of a population. It doesn't tell your story. It doesn't talk about your support. It doesn't talk about your optimism. It doesn't talk about your personality. There's so many other things that belong to you alone that you can draw strength off of, right? And that was something I just, I had to steadily try to remind people, is that these stories, I mean, it's always good, listen to your doctor, but remember, that's a population level story. That is not your story as an individual, and you get to create that.
I love that. That's very well put.
One more thing I wanted, we have a few more minutes I wanted to talk about.
Sure.
You actually do harp therapy, which I thought was very interesting, at hospices.
Well, I'm a musician, I always have been. And I'll tell you a little story about that too, because when MS started to take away the use of my hands and limit my ability to play, I played 15 different instruments. So when it started to really affect my ability to play music, I was so saddened by it, and it was such a loss that I sold a lot of my instruments because it was too painful for me to see them around me. But then after years of not having them in my life, it was just, that was too painful. So I decided at that point, I'm going to reframe how I view this, and I'm going to bring some of these instruments back and even focus on instruments that might be easier for me to play, that I've never even heard of before. And so I did, and it's just been the gift. I started really studying the effects of the power of sound, the power of vibration, and the healing properties of sound. And so I became a student of the field of cymatics, which is the beautiful patterns. They're like natural mandala, beautiful shapes and designs that sand will take on when sand is sprinkled on a plate of metal, thin metal.
I've seen that.
And then a violin bow is played, certain tones. Beautiful things are created. And that actually happens inside each of our cells because of sound. It can be toxic sound, or it can be beautiful sound. It can be the sound of words, I love you, versus the toxic things that happen on our cells with the words, I hate you. Certainly the Japanese wonderful scientists who did that study with molecules of water crystals. I'm sure if you've seen the movie, What the Bleep Do We Know, or The Secret, that's all in there. It's all about sound vibration. So I wanted to study that, and I found out that the harp has the most therapeutic healing vibration of sound in terms of music, because it has the longest unimpeded vibrating string. So all of a sudden I had an interest in the harp, but I wanted to not learn harp for orchestral type of music. I wanted to learn it for healing and calming and peace, and to be able to play for patients at hospice. That was just a calling that I was feeling. And so I developed a GoFundMe campaign, and I did everything I could to put this dream into play, and got enough money to actually buy a harp, because I'd never played one, and go to harp therapy school, I think the best school, International Harp Therapy Program out of San Diego, California, and learned about the healing modalities, and then brought it back and started volunteering, playing bedside for patients at hospice. And I couldn't, I cannot describe the meaning of that work. I had, just on one of my visits, my third visit, I'm playing outside the door of a room where a client was dying and his wife was in there. I didn't know she was in there with him at the time. And I'm playing all these modes, healing modes that I learned in harp therapy school. And all of a sudden, out from one of the rooms, this woman comes out and she starts walking towards me, and she's in tears. And I keep playing, but she leans down and says to me, I don't mean to interrupt, but I have to tell you that my husband is dying, and we've been in there in the last 20 minutes you've been playing. He became cognizant for the first time, and we started talking. And he said, I think we're hearing the music of angels. And she said, I cannot possibly thank you for that.
Tears my eyes.
That's the power of the harp. And so what I learned to do is just be a channel. I'd get myself out of the way and let the harp do its thing. And it does it every time. Every time.
Wow.
It's amazing. And I also do it now. I took a program of caregiving with the mountain dulcimer. I'm a mountain dulcimer teacher. And so I do that kind of work with the mountain dulcimer as well. So the harp, I mean, music is incredible. Sound is incredibly powerful. And when we can use it for peace and healing and calming, and certainly to make a beautiful place of transition from our state here on earth to the next level, our next state of being. It's a beautiful bridge.
Wow. You brought me to tears with that story. Because I know how powerful those moments can be for, hearing about that husband and wife and being able to have those few minutes. I know that would have been very profound for them to have that. Is there anything else that you really wanted to touch on that we haven't explored?
Well, I could go on for a long time about this stuff, and I'd love to hear more from your end of what all the insights that you've discovered and found meaningful, because there's so much overlap in your mission and my mission. So thank you for the work that you do.
Oh, thank you for saying that. I originally had wanted to talk about your work in the hospice because of I've only had one YouTube video that was censored, and it was actually talking about embracing death. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it wasn't from the point of encouraging people to choose death, but it was just, I think that we have that we look at death like it's something that we need to push off and avoid, and that it's something we need to fight against. And it's such a different view than I actually have of death. And I know that having that idea that it's something that we need to fight at all costs brings so much suffering to a lot of people, not even just the person passing, but sometimes it's even harder for the person passing because there's so much pressure that they feel they need to stick around to save the suffering of others. And so I was just wondering if a little bit about your perspective, having worked in hospice.
Mm-hmm. And also brings to mind one of my, believe it or not, gifts that I feel I've been given by having been given this diagnosis of MS. Um, when you feel that much closer to that other reality, that your life, the time you have on this earth is limited, more limited than average. Well, I'll speak to myself. It's a gift I've been given to realize from the inside out, not cognitively, because I knew it cognitively, but to really know it from my full being, the sacredness of time and the sacredness of life. And from my perspective, that is the gift of death for all of us, to realize the specialness of every single moment that we've been given, and to be present and to be giving and connecting, and giving of ourselves with all of those moments that we have, and never to forget that. So I totally agree with you. The Western culture has done a terrible thing to death and made people really afraid of the idea of death. Death is a natural part of life. And I think it's a gift given to us so that we can, if we heed the call, we remember on a daily basis the sacredness of life and live our life accordingly.
Yes, that was certainly the gift that I received from working with people living with cancer. Is them just telling me over and over about, I spent so much time worrying about the dishes, and I spent so much time worrying about and I realized just how much stuff is unnecessary. How much mental stuff is unnecessary, how much stuff in their environment. Because when it gets down to it, it's those connections, it's being present, it's having more intimacy with their, not only the relationships in their life, but more intimacy with the world, in nature, and all of that. And that to me was just such a beautiful gift that I received from doing that work. And it's so contrary to some of the messages. And I wonder right now, with everything that's going on, I just see so many people dealing with the, severe anxiety and depression, and trying to manage all this uncertainty. And I wonder if we just could have these conversations about death, and about presence, and about intimacy, and all of that. If people would have more, I know they would have more tools to deal with things like this that we're going through right now.
Yeah, I agree. I agree totally. And that's why I think the work of a person like Brene Brown is so important, because when you're talking about vulnerability and accessing that, giving that vulnerability, which allows another person to be vulnerable, you are in the moment, in the present, you are totally connected, and you are giving and receiving what life and love is all about. That's what we should be focusing on, like you said, and like your patients have realized, not the other stuff, which is just trivial.
Mm-hmm. Well, we are up on time here. This was just a lovely, amazing conversation. It's not, actually, I cry all the time, but it was that's a very touching story. I want you to have the opportunity to share with my listeners how they can learn more about you and get in touch with you.
Well, sure. I'm kind of all over Google. If you Google my name, I come up all over the place. But a good starting point would be to just put in my full name, which is Virginia, Virginia, and then my last name, which is O, M as in Mary, A as in Apple, N as in Nancy, .com. So it's virginiaoman.com. That'll take you to one of my websites. And that's a great place to start. There's a video of me there. There's the download that you can see there. about the mind-body connection. And I encourage you to look around that website. I have some blog posts that I've put up there. Take your time on the site. It's not a lot of things to read, but I think you'll find a lot of meaningful things by checking out the website, not just looking at the services I provide. And there's a way that you can get in definite contact with me there. There's a contact form you can fill out. You can schedule a free consult with me. I'd love to hear from anyone. This is my passion. This is my purpose. And I just want people to move from darkness into this light of flourishing and finding themselves and giving this lightness to the world, because that's why we're all here, is to give that. So,
Well,
yeah, thank you.
I want to thank you for coming on. You have such an inspiring story, and I just really, really appreciate you taking the time to come on the Chaos and Light podcast.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for the work you do and for giving us the opportunity for these podcasts to hopefully reach and make a difference.
Well, thank you. All right. Well, we will be right back after this ridiculously short break. Are you enjoying this podcast and want to help this lady out? Well, share it with friends, or even better, leave a review on iTunes. We'd love to hear from you. Now back to the show. Well, that's it for today's episode. Coming up on the next episode of Chaos and Light, I have Jonathan DePotter, and we have a wonderful conversation about plant-based medicine, healing centers, and when and how hallucinogenics are best used. Well, that's it. Take care and seek the mystery.